Hello everyone, and welcome back for another episode of Pokemon Legends Kyurem, the series where I draw Pokemon for and write a unique story for a Legends Arceus style narrative that would take place in the ancient Unova region. Before we start off, since this is the first episode that I'm working on after the series airs, I am able to say that I am absolutely blown away by the support that the series has gotten so far. I've got so many nice comments, critiques, and suggestions, and it makes me incredibly happy to read through each and every one of them. A few things to note in the form of answering several popular questions before we get started. One is yes, I know that the Unova region's canon backstory has little to nothing to do with the real-life story of the Revolutionary War, and as an extension, the ruins that are found in modern Unova suggest a native culture akin more to medieval Europe or the Middle East than it does to the Native Americans. My ancient Unova won't just be a carbon copy of real life. The story that I plan to tell has elements of the real-world era, in the main characters being explorers from Galar, seeing the mysterious Unova region for the first time. However, the overarching story will take far more inspiration from the in-game lore and my imagination than it will from a history class. The second question that people asked was, will the Pokemon that I design in the series be restricted to those that can be found in the native Unovan decks? And although the bulk of the Pokemon will be Unovan to fit with the original Black and White game's strict adherence to the new decks, I won't restrict myself, as I can easily write in foreign Pokemon as being brought in by the explorers from Galar. So if you have any ideas of ancient Pokemon from other regions besides Unova, don't be afraid to leave them in the comments below. Speaking of, I've seen a few great ideas already that I cannot wait to implement into the series down the line. Now on to the reason that you've all clicked on the video. Our Legends Kyurem starter trio, Grookey, Fennekin, and Quaxly. Since Legends Arceus chose a mix of starters from other regions, I thought that I'd do the same with mine, and choose starters that didn't include the ones that are native to Unova. Each starter that I chose has multiple reasons for being the one that I chose to represent the respective types. However, the most important overarching theme that binds them all together, at least here in their first forms, is their relation to European-based regions. And I chose them each to represent a country that colonized the Americas in the 15, 16, and 1700s, because thankfully we're lucky enough to have all three represented in a Pokemon region. The first and most apparent is Grookey, that represents Great Britain, which colonized the northern two-thirds of the east coast of what is in the modern day the United States. Fennekin from Kalos represents France, whom largely colonized Florida, the Northern Caribbean, many of the Gulf of Mexico bordering United States states, and of course most of the eastern provinces of modern-day Canada. And Quaxly represents Spain, who as part of the Spanish Empire colonized much of the Middle and Southern Caribbean and much of Latin and South America. Obviously, there are further reasons than simply being three Pokemon that come from Europe, and those will come out further in their final evolutions, which of course would receive their own unique forms. So, with no further ado, starting in Pokédex order, we have Rillaboom. Since Grookey is the starter representing England, and Rillaboom already wears a cape of leaves in its original form, I thought it would make a good design to reference both the red autumnal leaves of the northern United States, as well as the red coat foot soldiers of the British Empire. I was careful to avoid not simply recoloring each of these evolutions, and instead further differentiating them by giving them unique poses, concepts, and personalities to differentiate them from their originals. With Rillaboom, I made a taller tuft of leaves on top of its head to represent the iconic hats of the Redcoat soldiers. My Rillaboom stands upright and holds a knotted log instead of a drum. This references the flintlock rifles that the Redcoat soldiers, and more importantly the pose that they would take when they held them at rest. Each of these Pokemon and the way that they're designed play three main roles. The first, of course, is to reference their quote-unquote home country. The second is to tie into people or events that took place in the Americas at this time. And the final concept relates to the player characters themselves, and how your starter choice might affect in your playthrough. But of course, I'll explain that explanation for the end. Rillaboom, the red coat Pokemon, and the evolved form of Thwackey. Thwackey who evolve in Unova are observed to take on this unique form of Rillaboom. It is theorized that this occurs due to the cooler environment affecting the hue of their leaves. It can be seen that this form of Rillaboom is far more stoic than their Galarian counterparts, using the elastic vines that grow around their waist to make a slingshot with the branches that they carry around. They fire projectiles like rocks to hit enemies from afar. The next Pokemon, of course, is Delphox, which seems to me to be the easiest of the three to relate to the northeast area. Delphox in its base form, already being based off of witches and wizards, seemed to be a perfect fit to make a redesign that referenced the Salem witch trials. Which, yeah, didn't take place in New York, but hey, New York and Salem, Mass are only about 100 to 200 miles away from each other. And Unova, though being shaped itself like New York City, does take big references from a lot of other states around it. My original concern was that this version of Delphox wouldn't be different enough from the original, but I feel like I changed it around enough so that the redesign worked. I took Delphox's massive ear tufts and rearranged them to make a shape that was reminiscent of a witch's hat, where the ears took the shape of a wide brim. I also, of course, messed with the color palette, giving the Pokemon a primarily yellow and purple color to pay reference to the fact that it had gained the ghost type. You've probably noticed so far, but I purposefully wanted each of these new forms to have color palettes that at first glance don't immediately read as the type that they are. Its stick wand became a more obvious sorcerer's staff, and again I added a whole ghostly feel to the low tones of the fire by giving them a violet tinge. Delphox, the sorcery Pokemon, and the evolved form of Braixen. When evolved in the Unova region, Delphox take on this unique form. Using their staff, hewn by their mystical fire from living wood, they cast balls of fire at their foes. This fire is said to continue to burn for eternity for those who are afflicted by it, even after the fire is put out. They carry their staffs with them throughout their lives, and it relentlessly pursues those who would steal it from them. In many parts of the world, this Pokemon has a reputation for untrustworthiness. The final evolution of this video is Quaquaval, and it was by far the most difficult one to find inspiration in America for. Its Spanish sailor and Carnival inspirations for the original form just seemed so far removed from the colonial Americas and their comparatively more drab aesthetics. This was part of the reason why I decided to save this mon for last and do it on a live stream. Through live chat, I and the folks on stream came up with the idea for this Pokemon. And although I had a vague idea for it already, you all helped me fully flesh it out. The plumage in original Quaquaval was easily reworked to reference the pleated jackets of the explorers from the late 17 and early 1800s, specifically referencing the clothing of the explorers from the Lewis and Clark expedition, a half-century after the Revolutionary era. I was also able to reform the pompadour of the original to look more like the hats that these explorers wore, and the claws that I added on the feet were to reference this mon's new secondary type, the Ice type. The Ice type was decided on to reference the famously difficult times that the Lewis and Clark expedition had during the harsh North American winter. The colors I reworked to reintroduce white as a base color like how it is on Quaxley, and I used greens and browns in a way that not only referenced the high jackets that these explorers wore, but also it gave this Pokemon the overall coloring of a mallard duck, a type of duck that is native to North America. In order to tie this mon in with the other two starters, I gave it an object to hold, as each of the other two have one of their own. I used this to reference the less prominent pilgrim side of its inspiration by giving Quaquaval a flag. Quaquaval, the explorer Pokemon, and the evolved form of Quaxwell. Only in the Unova region are Quaquavals seen to take on this unique form upon evolution. Due to their versatile plumage, they possess excellent traveling, swimming, and limited gliding capabilities. This makes them excellent long-distance travelers and therefore a popular choice for the companion Pokemon of wilderness explorers. They create and maintain beautiful banners using their own shed feathers, and use them both to mark their territory, and also to whip up viciously cold winds that they use to drive away their enemies. So this is the trio for the final forms of the starter Pokemon of Legends Kyurem. I'm pretty proud of them if I do say so myself, but as you may have come to expect, I'm not quite done with their designs. There was a third concept to these designs that didn't quite affect them per se, but rather would affect the look of the player characters. If you remember in Legends Arceus, you explored the Hisui region as part of the Galaxy Expedition team. But in the storyline of Legends Kyurem, your starter design would affect which of these expedition teams, or as they are referred to in this story, which of the service corps you would join. Should you choose Grookey, you would join the Army Corps, as this relates to their Red Coat inspirations. With Fennekin as your partner, you would be enrolled in the Sorcery Corps, and with Quaxley, you would explore the region as part of the Explorer Corps. Of course, this choice would not affect the main story, but might add some core-specific gameplay to the side quests and post-game of this hypothetical fan game. And also, of course, you'd get a class-specific outfit, which is the main way that this idea affects this video. Just like in Legends Arceus, the characters in the Legends Kyurem story will be obvious ancestors to the modern-day Pokemon characters, and therefore the player characters here would be ancestors to the player characters of the Black and White games, Hilda and Hilbert. Though initially I thought that I'd make these characters stand out a little more from their future several generations great-grandchildren, I elected to take the approach that the Pokemon Company took for Legends Arceus and make these two general ancient reskins of their modern-day counterparts. I did this to let the unique outfits stand out more, which sounds like a pretty backwards way to design a character until you consider the role that player characters play in these games, being a bit of a empty palette for players to supplant themselves onto. In designing these characters, I drew the outlines for the ancient Hilda and Hilbert respectively, and then went over all of them for each outfit variation. The army variations would wear a uniform reminiscent of the Red Coat soldiers that inspired Rillaboom. The sorcery variations wore robes and pointed caps that are sort of reminiscent of the school uniforms, taking vague inspiration from Harry Potter. And the explorer variations would wear hide outerwear, well equipped for trudging through the wilds of 17th century Unova. The art for the three starter designs, as well as the player characters, can be found on my DeviantArt, as well as all of the art for this series so far. Next time, I plan to take another step into visualizing the world of the ancient Unova region by creating a map that details the differing locations and how that they will relate to the modern Unova region, as well as recreate the map in the old-timey Hisui style. Speaking of this map, I wanted to know, before I go, if anybody had an idea for a name for the ancient Unova region. I hadn't considered this before making the map, but I'm halfway through drawing it at the moment, and I thought that Unova probably should have a different name, like how the people of Sinnoh used to call it Hisui. I think the explorers from Galar would probably call it Unova, but that the natives might have an entirely different name for this land. Any ideas you have, please leave these suggestions in the comments below. And even if I keep the modern Unova name, I'd love to hear some ideas anyways. But of course, that'll be it for this video. So, I'll see you in the next episode for the map. And as always, if you like this video and want to see more like it, then subscribe and turn on the bell to get notified when I upload next.